Does the Republican Party wants to be the party that doesn't just deny science, but denies measurement? I don't think so. There's no future in that. Responsible people who back the Republican Party need to bring their party back from the brink of one of the most embarrassing fiascos that any political party could get itself into.
If I may, the senator from Rhode Island, I think, has elucidated the problem with respect to climate change deniers. Let me read you a few quotes from members of Congress, unfortunately, and they would be funny if they weren't so alarming. Now, these are direct quotes from members of Congress who are denying the reality of climate change. First quote, "Is there some thought being given to subsidizing the clearing of rainforests in order for some countries to eliminate that production of greenhouse gases?" Second quote, "We don't know what those other cycles were caused by in the past. Could be dinosaur flatulence, or who knows? Global warming is a total fraud, and it's being designed because what you've got is
May the record reflect that this is perhaps the first reference in the history of the United States Senate to dinosaur flatulence.
I would hope so. Global warming is a total fraud, and it's being designed because what you've got is you've got liberals who get elected at the local level, want state government to do the work and let them make the decisions. Then at the state level, they want the federal government to do it. And at the federal government, they want to create global government to control our lives. Here's one about global climate change. It could just be a shift on the axis. I don't even know what that means. And they're a little bit humorous, except that these are sitting decision makers. And it really is time to wake up. It is time for those folks who are denying the reality of climate change to move off of their position, for those who are quietly agreeing with us about the science but not stepping forward and showing leadership to show leadership. And frankly, I think it's time for those of us who have been passionate about this issue to work together and to redouble our efforts. But I have 20 or 30 pages worth of quite alarming quotes. And again, they would be funny if they weren't from the sitting decision makers who have real authority over this question.
The one we hear the most often right now is, don't worry, climate change has leveled off. Global warming and the temperature increase has leveled off. Well, as you just saw, 93% of the heat goes into the ocean. So if you're measuring just the atmosphere, a tiny wobble in the 93% share that the oceans take up will make a massive effect in the atmosphere. But more to the point, the graph, if you take a graph, here's their leveling that they show over the last 15 years. The problem is if you go back through the data, you can show that it leveled here, and then 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 it leveled here. They're constant levels in an upward going staircase. And if you cherry pick the data, you can say, okay, it's gotten level for that period. But if you really look at the trend of the identical data, that's the real trend. That's the actual trend line through the data. So when somebody comes to you and says, ignore that trend line, instead, look at it having gotten flat, and by the way, forget all those other times it got flat before. What do you think about somebody who made an argument to you like that? It's a ridiculous argument. It ruins the credibility of the person who makes it. And how you can believe that is astonishing.
Well, and I think you're exactly right. And in some ways, that's a more dangerous argument than some of the other denier arguments, because it sounds like science. It's really not, but it sounds like science. But the most recent, in my view, most absurd, and we have now, I think, seen it for 3 or 4 winters, is every time there's snow, somebody, at first I thought it was just a sort of a little jab, a little rhetorical joke. But they're actually saying that because it was snowing last week that there must not be climate change. That is an argument that they're relying upon. I think because in the face of actual evidence, they're now having to rely on anecdotes. on the fact that it's icy in Antarctica, or there was a snowstorm in D.C., or it was unseasonably cold for a weekend in Georgia, or whatever it may be. But to rely on individual anecdotes about the weather, I think is pretty tough stuff to take. And I just want to make sure that we don't let that stand, that the idea that you get to look out the window and understand what's happening with the climate is a lack of understanding about the climate. Climate are long-term patterns over large swaths of land or ocean. The weather is, you get to check it on your iPhone app tomorrow morning. That's the weather. That's not the climate. It may or may not be hot or cold tomorrow. That doesn't tell you a thing about what's happening with climate change. And to the extent that somebody wants to pick off a day and say, look, it's 32 degrees in Seattle, and therefore climate change is not real, I don't think anybody actually believes that argument, but it's important that the American public realize how specious that claim is.